Thanks for everyone joining us here on our monthly webcast for all the CIOs and EdTech leaders across Kentucky K-12. I'm David Couch with the Department of Education. I'm going to be covering a lot of topics, but we're also going to ask for a lot of feedback from you all. I sent you the agenda yesterday, and for our districts that are watching, I sent it to you this morning as well, along with some Go Soapbox questions that I really would like for you to take time. I can't tell you how important it is for you to respond to those. We use those, and in fact, in 2 meetings I was in yesterday and one this morning, I used the information you've given us. It's a real-time kind of feel for how things are going out there from your perspective. And as we get closer and closer to school opening, which it has for districts, and then definitely for next week opening, is we're hoping to get those fine-tuned. It'll probably be the last time we ask a good number of those questions, because we were trying to just get a feel as the build-up of starting to school, where you all were at with some of the things the CARES funds were going toward, and even the non-CARES funds that we're going to. Also want to welcome those that are KETS partners that are joining us by YouTube, and also our educational cooperatives, anyone else that is joining us that way. So thanks for tuning in. Go Soapbox has poll questions, but it also has the ability for you to ask a question and for those to bubble up to the top. And so I ask our staff, our OET leadership team, as I don't have that up at the same time, just to let me know something that's bubbled to the top, and you can stop anytime for us to address that. And Andy and and Marty, I'll ask you to open up certain Go Soapbox questions as we get to that part. We did get someone that wanted something addressed today, so we've added that piece, and Phil Coleman will be covering that. So the first thing I'd like to open with, it's not on the agenda, but it's a kind of one of the things that worked out well. So last, I believe it was Monday, on pretty short notice, we found that the governor wanted to have a meeting with all the superintendents. This would be the 4th such meeting to do it. So the first 2 were trying to do by phone, and we had major issues with people not muting and talking, and then had an issue the 3rd time with the lobby and Teams. So the first 2 times we didn't use Microsoft Teams, just use phones. But the plus side of using Teams was you had the ability to mute, but there was a lobby issue with the product itself of not being able to accept more than 100 people at the same time, which is human nature to wait till the last second to join stuff. So I know Microsoft's working on that lobby feature function. But this was a win in a lot of different regards. What was interesting, the superintendents were asked to join the meeting muted and with their video off. And if they spoke, go ahead and unmute, and obviously you could do the video as well. And in 5 months, and I'm sure there are people in a lot of virtual meetings now understand it better, and understand better to be frugal with the bandwidth and be aware of what people have at their home. Not everyone has to be doing video at the same time, and really probably only makes sense maybe at the beginning, and then you back off, especially if you're not the moderator or anything of doing it. So we had 235 folks that were on there. What's the good news is, because Teams can really only hold 300 people, we couldn't have the superintendent sending that invite to everybody in the district and everybody in the community say, watch that. We just didn't have enough seats. Imagine, 300 seats in an auditorium, and maybe 298 seats in an auditorium, and 2 for the presenters. We can only get, 300 people in there. So it was good to know that, obviously some shared above. We have 171 districts. It really was only supposed to be the superintendent. If the superintendent couldn't make it, just one other person representing them. So obviously they went above that. We had a few the agency staff on there and people from the governor's office, but that's pretty good to keep it at 235. And I know everybody else that was monitoring that meeting going, you're watching it click and trying to see if we get close to 300. This was different in the fact that we removed them having to go through a lobby. Now, we did ask that they did have the ability to do a phone. I'm always nervous about the phone call in, especially if they don't put their name associated with it. because that could be just about anybody. And obviously, you know, we set these up just like this one. Not anybody can present and bring up something and share it on the screen. And that could be embarrassing. You've seen the equivalent of that with other virtual types of meetings. But I was pleased to see, and it takes coaching. All that took coaching from our staff. It took people to get used to doing it. And there's a reason why I'm kind of giving this as a kind of some background as before we go to the next topic. I know in all the virtual meetings that we've had with KD staff since March, I have two functions. One is the content that's being provided, but also kind of coaching them up behind the scenes of how to do some things. And Marty has done that too. And we've had other people on our staff, Regina and Beth, have been outstanding about that too. And just simple things like when you're showing a PowerPoint, don't show it from the window, show it from the desktop, because we recognize it was taking forever for them to go through slides. And so it's this, and that was 5 months worth of the coaching of our staff, or me just being on there, a lot of these, and coaching them up on how to do it, you know, how to do a background, be sensitive to folks that you're broadcasting to, because they may have 5 people in their house all trying to share the same network. And so be sensitive, really requiring them to watch it by video, or is it just audio and seeing a screen is enough? Lee Todd, who's one of our current state board members, and some of you remember he was the University of Kentucky president, but he was also an entrepreneur. He's an MIT grad, and he created a company called Data Beam. And his concept was he felt most things could be done with audio and seeing things on a screen that people can see, not necessarily seeing them, but you can see if they're bringing up, you know, a PowerPoint, or you could write on at the same time. Everybody could see it. And during those times, that was like 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago that he did that. And I think he sold it to IBM later on. But he just found trying to be frugal with the bandwidth that folks have. And not designing something so it takes up gobs of it, but also setting the expectations with folks. I know even when we had a two-way video conferencing network called KTLN, the Kentucky Telelincoln Network, is folks are wanting a precision of such a crispness in the video, and that requires an enormous amount of bandwidth to do that. And so people got to adjust 100% perfection to something less than that, so people can share the road of that. And I found during my life, and I think all of you have, is the average person, and I would say 99% of people have no feel for how much bandwidth they're taking up. Now, some don't care, but a good number have no feel. It's just like whenever I'm doing a big video conference and meeting, I always have to go and, you know, remind if my youngest son is here or oldest son is here, to remind them is don't be doing games during this time. Don't be watching Netflix movies during this time, because you're gobbling up a lot of bandwidth, and your mother's also teleworking. So it requires everybody in a household to be conscious of what each other's doing. And definitely if it's not work-related, education-related, please do that at another time. And so my sons would do that at a later time, but it requires that level of coordination. And so it's the same kind of thing as we're coaching up. And I've spent, you know, with the KD leadership team and in all these meetings, and I'm on, you know, tons of them each day, like probably you all are, but probably not as much as me, is just educating them everything behind the scenes. And I say it very gently to them if it happens during it. And I know Megan and Andy are two behind the scenes. I failed to mention them. I know they're constantly behind the scenes helping with stuff like this, and it takes that. But it's gently reminded, but sometimes you just can't do it behind the scenes. You just got to say it in front of everyone, but you do it very gently, and you're kind of helping them along. It's kind of like a real-time professional development. I remember one time someone was trying to bring in audio, and so we were showing them real-time how you can turn on the audio so people can see not only what you're showing, but hear it as well. But I was pleased how well that went. I think another key part of our success and that going so well is we spent time trying to understand what happened last time we had the governor talk to the superintendents. And I appreciate our field staff working with you all and your superintendent, because we wanted to find out, was this something from the superintendent level that, you know, they just didn't know how to get on Teams? They weren't used to doing it. Was it something with the bandwidth that where they did it at their house, where they couldn't get on it? They didn't have enough bandwidth that they were doing it. And so what we really found out, and we also asked Microsoft, was there something happening on your end that would have caused this. And folks on our staff know this drives me nuts, but it's true. Because of the mass and scale of what we do in K-12, and don't underestimate it, we are a Fortune 50 and 100 company in what we do across this state. And so we crush systems and we test systems like nobody else. And so we find problems in products that I was hoping some other Fortune 50 and 100 company would find, but we typically find them. And so we found a flaw in the Microsoft product for their lobby, which goes back to really well-intended people on the technology side, not thinking through how it really plays out in human nature or from a classroom. And we've just not had that with Microsoft. We've had that with other things that are playing in. Human nature is for people to wait to the very last second to join a meeting, especially virtually. And obviously, if you have in a meeting of 300 people that wait to the last second to join, it's the same thing as if you had a room that had one door and all 300 had waited at the last second to try to get in there. They're all jammed up. That's human nature. And Microsoft should have designed their product understanding human nature is everyone's to wait till the last second and test it as such as that. So it's always the testing part that they'll like, most people in the technology world, we don't have 300 people sitting around, but how can you simulate that magnitude? That's where you get the broken glass. And I think the other way you find your broken glass in the technology world is you just don't have your hard chargers test something. You have some pretty combative people testing it, folks that are almost forced to use it, and they'll find things that are wrong with it. With our SITS product, it reminded me, and for those who don't know what it is, that was a system for teachers to try to help make things better, but they put in a shot clock where if a teacher that was doing a self-reflection did not do it within a certain amount of time, it wiped it out. The technology person designing it thought they would just sit right there and they would complete it the whole time. Well, as we know, in the teachers world, they can have a child come up to them. They may be called up to the office, talk to the principal about something. So it was a blind spot for the flow of a school system, how it works, even though all of them have gone to a school system. So it's the same thing with these types of things when we roll it, is I always have that apprehension when we're the first to do it, because I'm always wanting to hope that these companies have run into it before and tested it. But to be honest with you, a lot of these companies look at their customers they're testing their product. They don't do it internally to the scale, and they count on companies like that to follow. And Microsoft knows I'm really anxious for them to fix this lobby function. So more than 100 people can get in at the same time. And the really bad part about it is, if you have 101, it can jam it up for everybody else that wants to get in later on. So that's why our lobby fixtures turned off. And a big part of our success that happened last Monday is that we turned off the lobby. Now, the lobby gives you some confidence that you're doing some screening, just like, let's say you're going to a place that looks at ID before you go inside. So turning the lobby off lets everybody in. And it does get a little bit risky when they're not using their name with a phone number, which there's ability to put a name with just calling with a pure phone number and doing it by voice. Those are the ones, to be honest with you, during that meeting with the governor and superintendents, I was constantly scanning, along with Marty. I know you were, and I think Beth and Regina was as well, constantly scanning those numbers to see if someone, tried to do something they shouldn't be doing. Obviously, they didn't have presentation rights, but you just never know when you don't have a lobby and a screener function to it. So I am hoping that I think with the Microsoft product, they've made some tremendous strides. They've had a lot of good functionality. I really like the cybersecurity behind the scenes they've done in comparison to other products. They've worked on it for a long time, and the privacy and the cybersecurity of it is extremely strong. Not 100% perfect, so I'm not trying to tempt any of the hackers out there, but super strong with it. They just need to fix that lobby function. And for our purposes to do large scale, it's going to meet it. So I wanted to use that some as a teaching point for this next subject. We've talked about for quite some time that we see a different way that folks are going to be teaching this next year. We have, I think, 20% of the districts that are starting out that told us early on they're starting out with totally virtual only. Obviously, with NTI, that's up the numbers. I think we're going to have like 20, 25 districts. Maybe it's not that high that are going to start out with in person as well before September, the end of September, which is fine. That's their call to do that. But from our perspective, from a technology perspective, we wanted to make sure we had the capability to upload that kind of mass doing it at the same time. And this is the same kind of discussion that I was taking you through with the meetings that we have. Is it necessary that the entire school, all classrooms have their video on broadcasting out at the same time for 7 straight hours? First of all, we said, do we have the technology capability of doing that? And we're, and Chuck Austin and the field staff in the beginning with you to really making sure they're coaching you up and making sure you're coaching up your superintendent, your chief academic officer, your teachers, much like we've been coaching the KD staff for 5 months using the virtual tools. And obviously, districts use other products. They use Google Meet, they use Zoom, or whatever they're using to just make sure they're sensitive of what we're all doing at the same time. Does it crush our network going out? Now, the cool part about our design, unlike a home design, to which typically the download speeds are much faster than the upload speeds. And I always tell folks that's why sometimes it takes longer to send an email with a pretty large attachment out versus getting it in. And that's why it's difficult if you have multiple people at the same time videoing out, that you may have to turn that down in a household. But the neat part about our design for K-12 within a school building, the upload speeds are the same as the download speeds, which gives us a great advantage in this pandemic situation. It wasn't designed that way for a pandemic, but it was designed that way, anticipating that there would be a time, and I anticipate accelerating this situation, accelerating it, that there would be homebound students that the teacher at the same time they're teaching a class, a real person class, they're also sending that same class to a homebound student. We always anticipate that, whether it be video or by voice. Didn't really happen a lot in the past, but now obviously we're well prepared for that. And I always use the example of a generator for a lot of different things. And Phil and his staff, and I don't know, Phil, if we've sent that document out yet that you and your team created about how people can be frugal with their bandwidth at the house. I know we're sending it to the Pritchard committee to share that with parents, but that's something we need to get out soon if we've not already gotten it out. But the analogy that I use with our staff when we created that is here in Woodford County we have ice storm every once in a while, and it cuts out power for the day. But I have a small generator. And when the generator is there, I have to be strategic and frugal with the things that are on in this house. We can't have the microwave on and the hairdryer on the same thing, 10 of the lights on in the house. Typically, if you do the microwave, that's the only thing can be on. If you do the hairdryer, that's the only thing can be on. But you can have lights on, you can have TV on, you can do some other things, but you have to be frugal for the big bandwidth consumers that are occurring in your house. So what I've told people to do is during this time, we all got to be frugal and strategic about how we're using bandwidth in our homes, but also the bandwidth that we're asking to be downloaded in our schools, as well as the bandwidth that's going out. And Marty, I know you and your team folks have worked a lot of people with the instructional design strategies of, is it really appropriate to be broadcasting out 7 straight hours, to a student? But I want you all to hit on those. I know we talked about this. A few of us talked about this here. Phil, Mike, Chuck, Marty, Bob, and myself. I think it's Phil, Mike, Chuck, Marty, and Bob. Yeah. So Marty, you wanted to say some things along with this area. So I'll let you say it.
Well, thank you, David. This is a big topic of conversation, obviously, in an instructional design mode where we're designing strategies right now with our teachers and with our students, and thinking about the digital learning experience our kids have. It's just really important. I just wanted to emphasize all of us finding ways to get into conversations with the folks, and that could be our instructional leaders, that could be our superintendents and our instructional supervisors and curriculum folks, but also teachers and school leaders, principals, right? To get into these conversations about design. So synchronous streaming, we want to make sure that we push hard on that. It's reserved for what we're referring to as intentional digital interactions. And we're not recommending for learning purposes. I mean, certainly there's the bandwidth part of the conversation that David was mentioning, but for learning purposes, we're not recommending a full day or all day basis passive consumption of direct instruction for excessive hours during a day, and that's not good for learning. That's not good for our kids. But because it's so easy to do, it just becomes important for us to enter in and push hard on the experience part of the equation. And so when leveraging like digital interactions for learning and for instructional design, it's just highly recommended to consider the total amount of high quality interactive screen time with students, and what that expectation is to participate, as opposed to just a blanket all on stream. Intentional planned digital interactions to support student learning, as well as social and emotional connection to school, is important. But again, that's most of the time best design, best practice for segmented, planned, intentional interactions. Also, David, I would add that video, is powerful, right? We know that live streaming, just like we're doing today, is super powerful, not just for connection, but for collaboration and for learning as a whole. But it's a tool, not the only tool. And so live video should be used at the appropriate time, and during instructional learning design. And again, push as much as you can on that screen time commitment. And then the final thing that I would say is that strategies like this can leverage different strengths of teachers and other staff, and co-teaching, but provide additional flexibility, but at appropriate segments. And so we want to just make sure we incorporate creative demonstrations of learning of kids, as opposed to just one way distribution. And so it becomes important to us as we think about the design work, David.
Thanks, Marty. And I'll let any of the ones that maybe we capture everything that we covered yesterday. We want to make sure we capture today. The one ask that I have of you all is, I ask you to coach up your superintendent, your chief academic officers, your principals, your teachers, play a role in that. And you don't have to get in the detail of education, but just making them, I found, and you can do that in a very non-threatening way to folks. And because none of us are 100% perfect experts in any of this stuff, even though it's in the technology field, we're all learning about it. And I always try to do it in a non-threatening way, not a critical way of trying to coach them up. And anyone that's taught or coached understands the techniques that you can use to try to address folks. And you can't always bring someone over to the side, a player, and talk to them. Sometimes you got to address them, address a situation in front of the whole team. But you're very sensitive to that. So this is one of those. Sometimes you can just send them a chat message privately, or even a text message privately. But I ask that you play that role and coach up. And if at a minimum, talk to your superintendent and your chief academic officer about this topic, and maybe they carry the ball with it, but really have an earnest discussion. So there's not unlimited. We got to be free with what we have. Yes, Marty.
I was just going to add just a couple other points that are, they touch on the learning side of the conversation, but also on the broader, technology implementation, maximizing the effectiveness. And so obviously we want, from a consideration perspective, and setting the right expectations. Obviously, our Wi-Fi needs to be top notch, and we, not having our Wi-Fi be that bottleneck, and monitoring that regularly to assess it. But also, we want to make sure that we think about bandwidth prioritization in terms of learning as well. Very similar to what our entire state. Did better than any other state during online assessment strategies, right? So we prioritized the types of bandwidth that we wanted to leverage the most with students and teachers at that time from an online assessment perspective. That was assessments. This is all about learning. And so think about that prioritization kind of concept. And then finally, just think through student experiences. So if we have students, and I want to, David, when you're ready to go soapbox question on this, but when we have some students in person, in our classrooms, physically in our classrooms, and some of our kids are off campus, we want to make sure that we think through that experience. So there's not a strong foundational reason for students inside of a classroom with a live teacher to also be streaming that video. We want to target that and prioritize, teacher, from an output perspective, download and upload kind of conversation that you just had, David, but also kind of prioritize our teachers sending out to off campus as opposed to the value or the, kind of the minimized value of every student also being in that same digital, or virtual session as well. So just a couple more points, and David, I'll pass it back to you.
I did have a question. It is because I see Casey Woods asked a question here is, and someone needs to take a look at, are we getting responses for all the Go Soapbox responses? I just want to make sure that they're able to fill them in beyond what we currently have.
David, they are all open, and we've got about 30 to 50 responses on all of them.
Okay, good. All right. So maybe it was just stuck there for a little bit.
So I would suggest, David, I'll go ahead and suggest if you filled out some of these questions if you could maybe just refresh or kind of drop your cache a little bit. And David, we were talking on the back end. We'll have a different strategy for next meetup. Okay.
The place is able to log out and log back in. So just do that, because I do ask that you. We need you to respond to this. This is super duper important. So I'm willing to work through it even here live to help get your responses, because some pretty big decisions and things that we're doing will be based upon your responses. They always are. So we definitely want you to be able to get to these and respond. Is there anything that's come up besides just to Go Soapbox has bubbled up in a question? The two topics that I've hit upon for us to hit upon.
Nothing has bubbled up from the social questions, David, and we are continuing to have more responses come in. So the questions are populating, or the responses are populating.
Yeah. We always like it, but this one's really super important for you to spend time to do that. It'll be very, very helpful. Your voice will be heard by spending time with this. And obviously you can write, your comment too, so your voice is heard. But it always is so helpful. And I think that's been a big part of why we've been successful over the years. We're not 100% perfect, but we do listen and we do react beyond that. Now, we can't make 100% of people happy, but I feel we got a pretty good heartbeat of what's going out with our field staff with these types of meetings, pretty real time, trying to see how things are going on out there. So I'll go into the next topic, and then we'll go to a couple of the replies. Just like any time, if you haven't had a chance to get to it yet, go and circle back to it, because I really don't take a snapshot, final snapshot that I share with others of the poll result until probably 15 minutes after our virtual meeting ends. So you do have a lot of time to get on there and do it, so don't feel like it's passed you by. But I did want to spend time on these two topics. I've briefed the Kentucky Board of Education on it recently. I've had an interview with the Courier Journal very recently, the Lex and Herald very recently, the Pritchard Committee this morning, and a variety of other organizations and folks. And so there's a lot of interest, and I always use it as an opportunity to educate folks on 100% of our schools are connected to the internet. And I know some say, why does he keep on saying that? It's because in nearly every setting I'm still in, they say, what are we going to do about just not the homes, but to finally get the schools connected to the internet? And I am not exaggerating. It is 99% of Kentuckians, it's probably 99.99%, don't realize all the schools are connected still. And it's all the leaders across the state. When I say Kentuckians, just every leader. So you can't say it enough. And my disappointment in the Lex and Herald article that came out, even though I spent a lot of time with that writer and she did a good job with it, is I asked one sentence be written for the first time in Kentucky history that all of our schools are already connected to the internet. And it's not like I think she purposely kept it out, but it's not near as interesting. Or the editor wiped it out, or they forget about it. I did the same thing with the Courier Journal article. So I asked one thing just to say our schools are all connected, because we have so many people that don't realize that. And so it's important in the situation we were just talking about is the teachers, if that's the district strategy, can bring the districts can bring the teachers into the school buildings. And even though students aren't in there, they can actually teach from there and do a lot of things because all the schools are connected. So don't ever underestimate the incredibly high percentage of Kentucky leaders and Kentuckians, all with good intentions, that don't realize all of our schools are connected. You can't say it enough, and don't ever be embarrassed. I'm never embarrassed saying it. So every time I'm in front of somebody, I say it, because there's 99% of the people in the audience that don't know it. And I always remind them of there's X% of the districts that did have the ability to broadcast for the students, not for the general public, for the students out to out in their parking lots when they didn't bring them into school. But also I'm working a lot, and that's what the question's about. I'm trying to find out is this last mile to the home, where we're at and not at. So it is true that Kentucky has had a better handle on this, significantly better than the other 49 states. As most of you know, this is my, beginning my 29th year, and 23rd year as the Kentucky K-12 CIO. The next closest to me is 7 years across the United States. But I've always tried to keep up with, this home piece, because as a dad of 4 children, I always knew that it was a significant, overwhelming advantage for them to have internet access for their schoolwork. Educationally, definitely a significant, overwhelming advantage. And always we've asked this question, way over a decade, 15 or 20 years, we've asked this question because we wanted to get a feel for when teachers are giving assignments, homework assignments or anything else, is how many of those students, can do some basic things on the internet from their house. And obviously basic has increased over the years. But some school-related types of things, not watching Netflix movies, not watching, the capability of bandwidth to watch multiple Netflix movies at the same time or play combat games, really basic things in a classroom. And even, if there's certain education related to YouTube, the ability to do that. And I've always been perplexed at my peers of other 49 states having nearly zero interest in capturing that. I don't know why that is. But now they're scrambling to try to capture it. NTI has also had us tremendously interested in this topic. So districts been collecting it, but when NTI started happening, and I know not 100% of districts run NTI until very recently, we found that they got very, very strategic and very, very identifying which students had it and what students did not have it. And I suspect those numbers got even better toward the end of last year and as you prepare to start this school year. We also, besides us asking you all, as you know, every October, November, December timeframe, we sent out a questionnaire, and we had 60,000 parents and students respond to it from the Department of Education. Those results have been shared with you. If you're not aware of those, put a thing there. So we don't know, have never heard of that. The field staff, just a reminder, sent out that family survey dashboard to everyone. If you don't think they've already seen it, but you gave the numbers of the homes that said they didn't have anything, which I think was like 3.2%. These are the homes of K-12 student in it, not all the homes in it. Or the 1% had to walk to the library, 1% had to walk to a closer home. So that was down to 5%. The state of Wisconsin, I don't know, someone needs to mute if it's not muted. So if everyone besides me could mute, if someone has it on that I can hear background noise. The state of Wisconsin most recently became the second state to really gather this information. And so the state of Wisconsin, if someone could kind of scroll down and see who's not muted, on our staff.
David, we've been trying to find it for a while. I can't see anyone.
Okay. All right. So I just asked those, and we may hit we call the mute button. We mute everybody, and then I unmute myself, which is always okay. Good. Thank you. Yeah. The state of Wisconsin also did this and said at this time to begin the school year, how many do you not have with internet access capable of doing not the super high end stuff, but basically doing school related work to begin the school year? And theirs is 5%. Our numbers that we've collected for quite some time have always been between 9 and 15%. We always thought the 9% was a more accurate number because those are the responses where it just wasn't a estimate, where the district really didn't have a really formative or a formalized way that they collected. They were just kind of estimating what that was. We more so gave credence to those that actually asked the parents and the students, but also asked in a non-techno widget way. Never ask a parent, do you have broadband or not? 99.9% of people don't know what broadband is and isn't. Don't ask them how many megabits do you have, you got to ask it in a term. And the national organization took my advice. And so for these other 49 states that not ask it, they ask it kind of like what we ask it in a way. Can you do the following types of things? Can you do a classroom assignment using YouTube? Can you do the following simple things that tells them do they have capability of doing schoolwork, school-related types of things? So we've always felt the 9% number was the most accurate. This is before the COVID-19 situation. Obviously, $200 million was allocated that to school districts to address a variety of things. You had $174 million that was for a very expansive amount of items, including technology. And that's why we're always asking that question as you've gotten closer and closer to this. How many of you do you see that the technology is going to be, the money's going to be spent on technology item, and more specifically, the last mile internet to the home and devices, which we're already interested in. But also you had $30 million that came from the governor's pot of money that came to every state. And it could be only spent on two things, helping with remote distance teaching and learning, and also to deal with feeding students. So that's why you see us so interested in this. And I know districts, Marty, through your design labs and your team's design labs are going meeting with superintendents and principals. Over and over, what happens is when those were just estimating the percentage, and this is a difficult part, anyone in a position, when you hear people don't have, and my staff knows I'm not a fan of some or many or most, those words. Most often I am a percentage person, if anyone knows me, and I'm going to say, what percentage do you best estimate some, many, and most is? An extremely high percentage of the time, it's a much smaller percentage that someone had in their mind. When they say many don't have, some don't have, most don't have, they're thinking it's 50%. When in actuality, it's 5 or 10%. And 5% is a much more doable number for most things than it's 50% broke, where you got to find a bunch of money. And then if you find a bunch of money for 50% broke and it's really just 5% broke or an issue, you've got a lot of money spent or allocated for things that's only a 5% problem, not a 50% problem. So it's important to really find out what it is and what it is not. We were just, there's an organization called Common Sense Media. They do a lot of good things, but they didn't base their results of their percentages on, they didn't ask the parents and students directly. They did include wireless access. They didn't only include it if you had a last mile wired connection to your house is the only thing that they included in their numbers. And we've always found through the years and through my time since 1995 up to now, I've always found parents of a K-12 student always have a higher percentage of their homes with internet access than the general population in that same exact area. These homes are finding a way, and we see it in 99% of middle schoolers and high schoolers, despite their economic situation in Kentucky, have a smartphone with internet access. Not 100% perfect internet access, not 100%, but they got a smartphone. 90%, 90% of Kentucky K-12 students have above third grade, have a smartphone with internet access. Besides being a father of four, I have four family members that are K-12 teachers, besides my mom being one. One's a third grade teacher in a very low income area. Every one of their students, every one of his students has a smartphone with internet access, every one of them. All my kids are teaching in low income areas. 100%, now this is not across the board for everybody, but 100% to over the high school level. I would say not the kindergarten level, my daughter's kindergarten teacher, but the two high school teachers, 100% in the low income area have a smartphone with internet access. Doesn't mean they can access it from their house. They may have to go someplace else, but they have it there. So my view on this is in this topic is Kentucky put a middle mile network in every 120 counties back in the 1993 and 95 timeframe. How do I know that? Is we have 100% of our schools connected to it. We've been using that middle mile network since 1995 for 100% of our Kentucky K-12 school districts. Now, has it improved? Has it beefed up? Actually, absolutely during that time. Since 2015, a second middle mile network has gone into every county. A very high percentage of that middle mile network is going along the same exact poles as the original one. So there's going to be at least 2 middle mile networks and usually a centralized location in every county. But I would say you can have 3 middle mile networks. You can have 10 middle mile networks in every county. The biggest challenge by far is the last mile. The last mile wireless and especially the last mile wired. And it is an enormous challenge to put last mile wired into places where declining populations. It's an incredible investment by an organization to put last mile wired in a declining population because they feel they will never get their investment back if they do that. Now, the really cool thing, and most of you know, I'm from Eastern Kentucky. I grew up in Johnson County, but our family has had a family farm in Breathitt County for over 200 years. From my time I was 3 years old to 16, every summer, the entire summer, I was spent on that family farm in Breathitt County, and it's in the most rural parts of that county. We just got running water to it. Now, we had well water, but we just got running water to it, I want to say 5 years ago. It's not been long. However, we now have 3 wireless internet options to that farm. We got the internet significantly faster, not because we were waiting for a last mile wired to get to it, but because of wireless. And I have 3 different options. I didn't even count a satellite option, 3 excellent wireless options to our farm now. And now actually, there has actually been a last mile wire that's been added to it. So my words of advice to people when I talk to them, and I talk to a lot of groups on this, if we're trying to reach students this year, especially by this August or September, no one should be counting on a new last mile wired reaching all these homes. Now, there may be an already exact last mile wire to the home. In Johnson County, one of my classmates, while I was in school there, and this had nothing to do with me, he went and said, you know what, it's fiber throughout the entire county. My mom has it, has that capability. Not every county had someone that did that, that was out there. But you're very capable of doing it. You don't always have those options, but there are families there, they have a wired option. They just can't afford it. They have wireless options. They can't afford it. So a huge part of this, not 100%, is an affordability. And so my advice to folks is stop waiting for a last mile wired, because that may be a 1 year, 2 year, 5 years, 10 years, or as Election Hero quoted me, I wish they included the other years, it may never happen. If it took 5 years ago just to get running water to our Breathitt County farm, now we had water from the wells, as I said, I think we're in the forever, close to forever time frame for a lot of these places getting a last mile wire. But the great news is wireless hits a very high percentage of homes, not 100% perfect. And you may have to move 100 yards, you may have to drive a mile, but wireless internet is a whole lot better a thing to try to, realistic thing, really during this next school year, to try to get in place. So that the time and energy is spent, can we get hotspots out there? Now, hotspots take 2 forms. I mentioned to you before, we have an enormously high percentage of our students that have a smartphone with internet access, but they may not have the hotspot. Now, a good number of them may have the hotspot service paid for, and they don't know it. So we always got to remind folks, so you're already paying for your hotspot. But the really cool part about so many students with a smartphone is if they can have that hotspot service turned on, then they can wirelessly tether their device, their laptop, their Chromebook, or some kind of equivalent of that to their smartphone. Now, as a dad of 4, the plus side of having it built into this phone versus a separate hotspot device, now you're having your kids trying to keep up with two things. I had a tough time with my sons keeping up with their 2 basketball shoes and their 2 cleats. It was always easier with one. So the same thing with this, if you can find an all-in-one device where they're carrying this around and they may not have an excellent signal from their home, but can they go someplace close and not having to drive all the way to the school, and just turn that hotspot on and turn it on for a reasonable cost. My peer in the state of Washington is, and this is what we've been working on with vendors for quite some time and closely monitoring, is trying to get, I've noticed across the United States, is $20 per month for unlimited for K-12. Not the whole household, just for K-12. The other advantage we have in Kentucky is we've always, because of the 1998 law, but also the SIPA requires it, is internet content management filtering. And a good number of you, even though they went home, felt that if it was a school-issued device, that device should be going through the internet. And especially if there's any service being bought by the district internet service that you're paying on behalf of the district to a home, definitely that's a whole different ball game as well. You are paying for the internet to that home. So the good thing about that is in working with vendors is we say, you know what, most of these districts for the school given device, let's say it's a Chromebook, and if they give them a hotspot, in a sense, external one, are making it so only that computer can get on that hotspot, and that hotspot is pointing to a K-12 internet content management system. So even if an older sibling says, I want to get on your computer, let's say that older siblings in their 20s, or even an adult wants to go watch a bunch of Netflix movies or wants to watch a bunch of combat games, combat games or whatever, they will find they're really limited to K-12 content. And they'll quickly say, you know what, I'm not really interested in getting on your device and your hotspot because it doesn't get to all the other things I want to be able to get to beyond what you can't get to for schoolwork. So it makes it much more appealing for a vendor understanding that to bring it down to a lower range. My goal in working with vendors has been getting it down to $10. Why is that $10 figure such a magical one? Well, first of all, we have 400,000 approximately free and reduced students that qualify for free and reduced lunch of our 650,000 students. We have close to about 350,000, maybe say 320,000 parents that have found a way to fund it. I would like to get them down, and all parents down, to $10. For the school districts that have used their CARES money to buy the hotspot or hotspot service, I would like a way that you've done it. You may go back to them and say, lower that cost. If you haven't done it yet, paying $10 makes it much more manageable. That money goes a longer way. But for the parents that are already paying, if you get it down to $10, there's something called the Federal Lifeline Program that pays very close to $10. So those low-income parents, and this is nothing, when everyone, my staff knows this, when you go, well, what about this 1% exception, this 1%? I don't ignore those. I put those to the side. We'll circle back to those, but we're not going to spend 99% of the time on a 1% type of one-off to it. So I know there's exceptions, to all this, but a very high percentage of our low-income parents, and I think a lot of these homes that don't have it, it's just they can't afford it. Johnson County's that. Louisville is that. You have almost the same percentage of homes, that snapshot back in February, that did not have it. Both of them have an option available to them. In the case of Louisville, it's multiple options. Even in the case of Johnson County, it's multiple options, wireless and wired. They just can't afford it. So what can we do to drive down the costs with these vendors to get it down to the $10 range? I'd like free, but down to the $10 range. So all these low-income homes can more easily afford it, but also we're taking advantage of the hotspot service that could be built into the student's phone. Once again, not keeping up multiple ones, and the separate hotspot devices aren't quite like the toilet paper was, where you can't get it and everybody's stocked up on it, but they take longer to get. But turning on a hotspot on a student's phone can almost be immediate. Most of you that have smartphones, is if you want to turn on a hotspot and have that available on your phone, that's a call to your phone company, and you got to go do the billing. They got to see the money, but they turn it on like that. They're not ordering a piece of equipment. They're just turning that service on. We're also seeing other folks help drive down these costs. Up in Covington, tremendous example of how you can drive down costs. But also part of their CARES money in Covington Independent Schools was spent toward this. They also partnered with some private businesses to help pay for the internet access for a year. I think it's like 400 students for a last mile wireless, or if they have a last mile wired option, to do that for them as well. 5 school districts also up in Northern Kentucky had Goodwill that was willing to pay for the last mile internet for X number of school districts. So we're trying to take a look at all the ways to do that, but also a big part of this component is the devices themselves. We have about 800,000 computers in Kentucky K-12. And to give you a scale of that, if you combine all of state government and all of local government together, we are 8 times bigger and have 8 times more of these devices than all of those. Yeah, thanks. United Way is the partner. Appreciate that, Casey. United Way is partner. The bandwidth we consume is 20 times bigger than the rest of state government, combined, and local governments combined. So going back to 800,000, we have 650,000 students approximately. It's a little bit bigger than that. About 100,000 K-12 adults. So we have better than a 1-to-1 ratio. But I see from the answers you've given before, and we'll bring those up here soon, you are addressing a very high percentage of this mobile device for the home, which makes sense, particularly if, as most of you know, any labs that you have with desktops were basically boat anchors and unusable by the students during this pandemic. The time we shut down, they just sat there and the student could not use it. So the labs and the libraries that were desktops, not being critical of that, but during these types of times we're so mobile. But I've also wanted more mobile devices for quite some time. You can't have 100% of it. I know, and there's all reasons why you have desktops for a certain percentage of it. But particularly lower grades, K through 3, there's something called project-based learning. And it's as simple as you have stations, 2 or 3 stations set up in my daughter's kindergarten class and my son-in-law's 3rd grade class. And you have maybe 5 or 6 students working on the desktop computer or computers, 2 or 3 of them typically in these classrooms, these elementary classrooms, maybe 4, maybe 5 if you count the teachers. And the other students are working on other things that don't involve a piece of technology. Obviously, during these times, that's not very helpful because I suspect, and I started to ask that question to you all, but I suspect a very high percentage of you, even though we're at 1-to-1 already, sending a desktop computer home was not really part of what you thought about doing very much. First of all, it's not very portable. There's a lot of things they could drop. Doesn't have a wireless connection with it already. Most of it needs a wire connection to it. If you're in an environment where you're planning to go back and forth, especially this school year, that didn't work out so well. So I could see where you're buying mobile devices to really make sure it's 1-to-1, 1-to-1 mobile. Now, LaRue County has had, if they're not the first, they were one of the very first, is 1-to-1 down from kindergarten all the way up to high school. But they didn't allow the kindergartners and 1st and 3rd graders to take them home, even though they had 1-to-1 until this happened. Covington Independent had 1-to-1 at middle school and high school. So they'd use their CARES money, maybe some other funding sources, to bring it down to 1-to-1. Louisville has bought 10,000 hotspots, and they used, I think it's a non-CARES funding source, but it was a federal funding source to do that. And Lincoln County Schools on Friday, and there's others of you, and I don't know what the funding source was. I suspect it was CARES funds, that the portion of CARES funds for that district bought 1-to-1 for those students as well. So I'm spending a lot of time trying to educate this and trying to understand this topic for a lot of variety of folks. Obviously, you all know this, the beginning of school has tons of people interested in it. I mean, any news channel, national, international, state, radio is filled with school opening and has been for the past month, particularly this piece here. So I would like to pause here, and I would like to go through some of the Go Soapbox responses, if we could. I would like question 1. And this is really around the students that don't currently already have it. So what is the number down to? And just trying to break that down. So I don't know if that's Marty or
yeah, I got you. I'm pulling it up right now.
Okay.
So you should start to see question 1.
Okay, let's see it. Can you make it a little bit bigger?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh.
Whoa. Yeah. Okay. All right. So what we found with this, southeastern Kentucky has significantly worse percentages than the other parts of the state. It's not 100%, but even eastern Kentucky and northeastern Kentucky, the southeastern part of the state, we know has worse percentages. I'm pretty open about telling folks about that as well. So we give an average of it. Like I say, we've been using 9 to 15% for quite some time. And okay. Just pausing as I'm looking at this.
Yeah. And David, keying in on the question, what remaining percentage of your K-12 students from low-income homes?
Yeah, this is the remaining percentage. This is not overall. This is the remaining percentage. Yeah, so this is what I'm after. Because obviously our statewide percentage is around 9 or 10% that we feel it's going to be. It's like Pike County had about 10% to go.
So quick calculation: 60% of our low-income homes are reporting or estimating, I should say, 10% or less of those low-income homes. whereas 40% are looking, 40% of our responses from districts are looking at a greater percentage of low-income homes.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark. Let's go to number 2. Question 2, if we could.
Yep. And this actually falls in really good alignment with what we would have expected. Yeah. But it's good to see as we target, that this access at home formula is obviously 3 parts, right? It's having a device for each and every kid. It's also home internet, and it's also access to great digital content as well. So this really helps and falls in line with what we would have expected.
Thanks. If we just go to 3, I think that's where we're starting to get into the CARES expenditures.
Yep.
Yeah, and this is what I've been, this is consistent here.
80% say high or super high.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. The other thing comes into play with this is the responses we got in field staff. I just ask if you've not already done it, send the family dashboard post, because a very high percentage of homes said they had it. Now the question would be, if they're all stacked up at home and there's one computer and the school's not providing a device, and you have 2 or 3 students stacked up at home and then trying to share one. So that's where it kind of comes into play, or even the parent trying to get on there and do something. So, and like I say, all these is we wish we had 100% of 100% of 100% solution, but we're not going to have it. We're going to get 99 and try to find something for the other 9, the other percent. Yeah, Marty, what were you going to say?
Well, one thing that we've been sharing in the digital learning design labs, and just working step by step, we definitely recognize, and we all know this is tough work. This is hard stuff, and we have to count on a lot of partners. And sometimes our partners are struggling and can't be responsive and reactive enough to our needs, and we're working through that. But this is really hard work. But just to say that it's from at least a belief statement or perception that this is high and super high for great number of districts. That's really helpful to continue to think about that target. Again, 1 device per every kid, not counting on sharing. We do know, David, that several districts have had to rethink a strategy where and have shared in the design labs where the original intent was to get a bunch more devices in from device partners or Chromebooks or whatever, and because devices are delayed a bit, had to rethink that strategy and implement additional parent surveying to say, hey, if you have a device at home, we could certainly use those school issued devices for other kids at lower grade levels. And so kind of working a combination strategy there.
Yeah, like I said, the family dashboard did not include the school issue device. So yeah, that's why we're thinking the number is pretty high when you combine those two. Let's go to question 4. I think this is the what we see by it. So a question, and I hope folks don't get defensive about this, is what happens in this scenario where we have such reliance on virtual, and you can comment there. So please don't be defensive or say David Katz said we're wrong. We shouldn't, we're doing this, but we're just trying. The average question is $200 million has gone down to districts, and you've already identified that some of you that there's a remaining high percentage. The question is always like, why did you not use your CARES money and seek? Now, 100%. I know because I'm a percentage person. There are a percentage of homes. I think it's a really low one that can't get any signal at all of anything. There's no last mile wire. There's no last mile wireless. But the question would be a person that can get that has an existing last mile wired or can get a last mile wireless solution like a hotspot through the phone or a separate device or even satellite. Why aren't that money given it's $200 million? And I know there's a variety of other things, especially the GEARS money. Why is that not going toward that to address that? So that's the question that I get. And then it's always like, well, what are we going to do if the districts don't address that. And that comes up often as well for this. We estimate it's really like this is 5%, 6% of all remaining students across the state don't have it. So what we do about, this last remaining 5%, particularly they're I would say 95, 99% of them are low income, and just can't afford it. So let me gather that in there. So the ones is, and we're not tracking this, is the ones saying not on the radar screen. Is if you, and I can see that if it's already been provided, but if you had someone provided, the question will be, and to be honest with you, there's and this, there's not a high percentage of parents that call, but they call, and I know one particular county that's close to where I live, they are not funding with any of the CARES money the last mile to the home. And so, the parents are, complaining to a lot of different folks, well, all this money was given for this purpose, they're not using it, I can't afford it, which is the two issues I talked about before. What else can I do to try to get internet to my home for my child, given this high reliance on the virtual? Because I'm not saying that in a critical way, I'm just saying what I hear, spending an enormous amount of time on this topic. Let's go to the next item, if you could. Next question, Marty. And I've had time to I didn't print it out to compare what this was compared to the last time. But that's a pretty healthy percentage that's going toward technology. If I saw right, a good percentage of you all are spending it on those that don't have it, or you want them to have a school issue device, which I understand all the reasons why that, especially if you're doing hotspots. That's a good 1-2 punch there. Is to address this with the the device itself, the laptop, the tablet, and the last mile wired or wireless internet, as long as the PD that you could be doing. So let's go to the next one. This is the governor's portion of the funds that he gave the district spent on either making sure kids are fed or this last mile distance learning. And this is one where folks will really be asking, the question about why is this not going toward these remaining kids? And no one's collecting this, so please don't go your super. David Couch is collecting this. He's not going to ask you specific. It's not that. It's just a question that we get to it. So these just tell me.
David, yeah. as a reminder, these are questions that we've asked now for 3 kind of rolling months to try to see what shifted as district leaders, like on today's meetup, are trying to shift to where the value proposition is.
Yeah. Because we've seen it really since we first started asking this, is while it wasn't on the radar screen, a lot more have gotten on the radar screen as it's gotten closer and closer. So my intention is lay these side by side and really show that as it became pretty apparent that if you're not 100% virtual, but it's always going to be a high percentage of what you do going forward, a big part of the toolbox of what you do, is that probably became more of a reality of trying to address those parents. Is, what, I want my child this year, I've chosen for them to be virtual, just not at the beginning of the school year, but throughout, is try to address that. Obviously, they have to have those two components to do that. We've talked about the different teaching learning styles as well. Okay, let's go to the next one. Number 7. I'm trying to remember the order of them myself. Yeah, so this has given us a feel for it, and we know this is happening. So for obviously those are starting all virtual, and we call this, I think it's NTI version 2.0. Really, the intention is to hopefully it's been made better and higher quality than we finished the last school year with, and obviously you finish the school year, going to have drop off of people not showing up, even if it's in person. But I know a lot of time and energy has gone into make that a better experience. And everyone says, and I agree with it, there is nothing that substitutes in person. I mean, you can't, this is nice as a backup, 10 times a year, or a child is homebound. There is nothing, and there's certain situations where a child does not learn, and it's a small percentage, well, in a traditional K-12 setting, and they work a lot better virtually. But we know everyone, including all my kids that are teachers, they would much rather be teaching them in person, all of them. I mean, there's this where I read, especially the kindergarten or third grade teacher, that's just such an important thing. So this is no easy response to this. So that this is helpful. Let's go to 8.
Yeah, and well, David, I just wanted to input just a bit that we know that this is actually being collected in a formalized fashion through all school district NTI points of contact to try to get a better sense of the kind of moving target here. And we all know that we're working with that moving target best we can. I'll also give a shout out to we all mean across the state, we mean different things by different words. And so the word virtual in this case, it would be all remote. And we also know that, they're blended learning in general, we all refer to as in-person and digital kind of feels. In this modeling case, we've also referred to it as hybrid scenarios or scheduled kind of rotation. So it's good to see, at least right now, where 76 responding district leaders are seeing their district right now. And we know that this is a moving target.
Part of it is, I'd ask you in the Go Soapbox responses, and like I said, I don't have that up. I count other people look at it, is for this percentage, let's say it's 5%, that may be plus or minus, 2 or 3% or even 5%. What are your suggestions on how we address these remaining 5% of the students? Given what your answer is here, we know it's 100% virtual or blended. What are your suggestions on how we address this? For the last 5%, but also I would say for the percentage of parents that are paying these. Like I said, my goal would be getting it down for all low-income parents. Ideally all parents, but low-income parents, to get it down to a low cost for this next school year, and finding, like the Federal Lifeline program is one that brings it down. But I'm trying to think of ways, because obviously we want to have this here. We know there's no 100% perfect solution that comes right to the house. The child, even with a hot spot, may have to drive or walk a distance away to use it. None of that's perfect to do it. So, but if you put that, would give some suggestions to something that for ideas that I could have and consider, ponder. Let's go to the next one. This will take us into the next session to just kind of get a status on where the CARES money is that the state shared services for this. And I know, Dee Dee, I think these next two are yours, but it's just not yours alone. Obviously, this functionality crosses around the instructional side as well, and I guess Marty as well. So Marty and Dee Dee, you don't have to have a comment. Is there any comments to this as you look at it?
I'll tag on to what Marty said. And, when we talk about blended learning, we talk about a lot of different things. But this blended learning functionality that Infinite Campus has added is required for this year. So the fact that we have a lot of folks that have not set up, or it's not David Couch's office requiring it, it's actually Robin Kinney's. And the reason for that is, we're actually going to be calculating participation this year and going to have to share that information. And some of you probably know that in the past, NTI has been reported at the district level to David Cook's group, and it's all going to be pulled from Infinite Campus this year. So we really want to make sure that this information is, understood, that folks are setting it up in Infinite Campus, and even starting virtual. The blended learning setup needs to be done before the first day of virtual classes or any classes, because it allows you to switch students from a remote. We refer to remote because that virtual word gets complicated because a lot of different people have different mindsets on what that is. But they're not in the school building, they're remote, or they're in the school building. You have a combination of both, that students are doing both things, or that you're is actually going to send the information to that information so that you can get the information in the system and switch these students back and forth as the time is needed. And David Cook, is with the Office of Continuous Improvement and Support. His group's been very, involved in this. This is the way they've decided to collect this information. So I think we've had some offices work very closely together to make sure that they're communicating out. The blended learning training session that we put on last week for Kentucky school districts was very well attended. We had over 400 participate. We've shared the video. We've shared the Q&A from the video with folks. You've all been on that distribution list, so please help us get that word out.
And Dee Dee, I would.
When you said interested, share with folks that are interested. I think the legislature is interested in these numbers, so it's just not folks in the department. So I kind of wonder how that's going. There's a lot of folks outside the Department of Education that are interested in, since we're not doing attendance participation.
And so, Dee Dee, you would expect that to be 100% yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I really did. But I also understand that that's not necessarily the right audience. In some cases, CIOs aren't really involved in the Infinite Campus setup. You've got your counselors working with your Infinite Campus system admin. So I'm not, super concerned that the numbers aren't because I think what you mentioned earlier, Marty, is the fact that when you think blended learning, sometimes they're thinking of something different. And because of that, they might have not have answered the question the way it was intended. I try to always include Infinite Campus with that blended learning because that is the core product functionality that's been introduced. But, some of you already had blended learning environments and you're already using that word for something else, and it can get a little bit confusing. So hopefully this is just an indicator that maybe we aren't completely clear.
Well, I'd also say you need to talk with your superintendent. I think a key role of anyone identified as a CIO is just not you handling the operations of the district and the money part of it as much as be involved, is you're communicating with your C-level peers along with your CEO, which is the superintendent and the chief academic officer. So this is happening. And the reason I say that, in superintendent meetings, this is probably mentioned in 50 or 60% of them, this concept and what we're doing. And the questions are asked that your superintendents are involved with. And so this is something you need to get familiar with, because they say this would have been expected to be a much higher percentage of you knowing about it, and definitely not saying no since it's required.
One of the ads from an EdTech leadership perspective is just the understanding of where we are in Kentucky. And it is worth calling out that we are pretty mature in this conversation based on the programs that we've had in place, based on the structures that we have in place. And so instead of relying district by district on, come up with your own kind of reporting system, we obviously have that through a statewide shared service. But the EdTech leadership moment, I think that several CIOs who are on the call today have shared with me in conversations, and all of us with our superintendents, is that from a minute by minute approach of what we used to think about for school structures, that at the school level and school district level, that minute by minute calculation, that still matters. That's important. But in terms of students, individual students, what we refer to as butts in seat, your butt in a seat for how many minutes, that doesn't matter right now. So that complete idea of attendance in terms of student by student attendance, we're setting aside for right now, and we're totally focused on our students participating and interacting with teachers in a learning mode week by week. And so that functionality that Infinite Campus has added with Dee Dee's leadership actually helps us do that way more efficient and do that in a way that is streamlined and makes sense and leverages things that teachers have already been doing for years and years. And so it's a really big win for us. But from an EdTech leadership perspective, it's important to kind of be able to have those conversations if you're not.
If you can bring up the next one, Marty.
One thing I want to add while you're bringing up the next one is the fact that it really changes the way what attendance is and how it's collected in your school buildings. Your attendance clerk is not going to be doing attendance any longer like they have in the past. It's really teachers, parents, students that will be indicating participation. So the attendance clerk, even at the elementary level, that has typically done a lot of that work, won't be doing that same function, because with the blended learning, it's embedded into that system and participation.
The things that there. Yeah, the things that teachers are already doing, right, Dee Dee?
And
right, not always at the elementary level, but it will be at the elementary level too. Any
longer is not forever. I think it's just like this year, because you said any longer. It's probably just this year.
Yeah, it's while the in this blended environment that we're tracking in campus while that's being used.
So this is probably a 1 year type of thing. Maybe it's a 2 year, but okay. Go to the next one. I see it here. Needy, you're aware of this? I think we had 111 I don't think
The
that number.
111 doing online registration. This is and we have had some really good feedback on the online registration. A lot of districts working together on this. Really is a good time to be thinking about what's worked well as it's been introduced, what you'd still like to introduce. Some of you worked regionally. The next opportunity for additional customization is going to start in September. Your system admins will get a message through the Infinite Campus support ticket that they need to schedule time with Infinite Campus. They get a day of training. Now, if you want to do that for just your district, that's great. That's what it's for. But if some of you that have worked regionally or worked with another district to try to, work through the setup with, with one of your peers, that works too. Infinite Campus will support doing the training for, a number of districts at the same time if that's preferred. So that training does need to take place before the middle of December. So that setup is available to districts that haven't even implemented online registration that may want to for next year, so that they can get set up while this training opportunity is available.
And campus learning, what's the number now, Dee Dee, that have signed up?
Still looking at 93 districts. These numbers don't show that. So I would encourage those of you that are maybe had it turned on, that's decided not to use it, to let campus know to turn it off. What we don't want to be doing is paying for something that's not being used. Many of the districts that had thought they were going to use it initially opted ahead because it didn't have functionality with Google Classroom. That changed last week. So a Google Classroom interoperability so that the grades can come back to Infinite Campus is available. So, some districts decided, even as late as last week that they want to turn that on. There's still time to do that. Probably need to have it turned on for this year if you're going to use it by the first part of September so that we can kind of find out our exact numbers of who will be using this year.
And Dee Dee, we'll come back to the CARES part because Phil, I want you to talk about Lightspeed and Chuck where we're at with that one, and Marty with PD and virtual schools. But since we just had to close out these Go Soapbox questions, let's go to the next two with Dee Dee with the report cards. I'm just trying to see where we're at with these two, and then we're going to circle back to the CARES.
Okay, the school report card's open right now. That includes a tech collection tool for technology. So I know we heard back from you all last year that the CIOs found that it was a whole lot easier sometimes to enter the data at the school level themselves. That way they could ensure that the data matched up with the technology readiness report. So that is open. Some of you that have not been involved at all, you may want to look into it a little bit more to see if there's something that you can do to make sure those numbers do align. The data needs to be validated and it needs to be reviewed and added in the system by September 4th. So right now we're still on the same track for releasing the public school report card at the end of September. So, and unless that changes with a new commissioner, we're expecting everything to go forth as we've seen in the prior years, just with less data since we don't have accountability.
Last 112, Marty.
Yeah, and a quick plug while we're pulling up number 12, we do have digital readiness working, rolling in right now. So just as a reminder, digital readiness collections are going on and to be submitted. Right now we have some good responses coming in. Here's number 12. What's your role with school report card data review and approval?
Okay.
I think I covered this one already, so.
All right. Thanks. So Marty, you can take those off. Phil, a Lightspeed update, and we're doing Dre's, the Collard's question up in Anchorage.
Sure. Been a busy end of the summer. We've been implementing Lightspeed relay for school districts, and so far we have 56,000 Chromebooks that have the relay client, 12,500 Windows devices, 476 Macs, and almost 4,000 iOS devices. However, in the last week, we have identified a problem, and it looks like it's a problem with relay, but actually it's relay just kind of identifying or overturning a problem. So the issue is the orange block screen that comes up with on a Windows device if you're on the KITS network or school network, and you're accessing a legitimate website. And it doesn't happen all the time. It's very sporadic. And so we've been working with Lightspeed, and now we're working with Lightspeed and our network providers, including AT&T, to try to figure out the actual reason for that. So in lieu of that, Lightspeed has been developing or tweaking their code some, so it won't be quite as sensitive, so that when a workstation, a Windows workstation, actually tries to go and regenerate that actual error, that the user doesn't see that and doesn't have to hit refresh themselves. So that's something that's in the works and will be coming very, very soon. I got a report from Lightspeed this morning that they have successfully tested that on in an environment such as ours, and it does work. So this appears like, again, I want to really stress it. While this appears to be a Lightspeed issue, it's really not a Lightspeed issue. It's a Lightspeed issue in the fact that they've actually uncovered another issue on the network, and it looks like it's somewhere downstream toward the internet. So we continue to work on that, and I'll report on that daily as we make progress.
And I guess the analytics, I know, Mike, because I know you don't have to say anything, is we've not started that yet, but our intention would be when we get past this relay part of it and getting it going there, we would start talking about analytics in the future webcasts. Correct? Does that sound right?
So we did enter into the analytics. We haven't started working with it yet or anything, but that information is being collected and will be available. So we will talk about it more in the near future. So we did enter into that agreement with Lightspeed for the analytics.
Yep. Okay. But we really got to get past this relay, as I kind of remember, before we really start taking full advantage of that. So probably the next webcast, we should probably spend time on that particular topic, because we should be pretty far down the line with relay by that time. So Mike, plan on talking about that next time. Marty, with PD, part of the CARES money that we had to say was for PD and virtual schools. So quickly, what's going on with those two items?
Well, across the state, David, we're moving full steam ahead. We've had a lot of participation, not to use some, many, or a lot, but working regionally with our education cooperatives has been a great partnership from a PD perspective, from a professional development and learning perspective. Now, what we're engaged in right now, and we know that we've been sharing over the last several months, but the digital learning design labs, we don't view as, like that hardcore, true, traditional professional learning. We are professionals and we're learning, and so that's good. But it's really about design work. It's about coming together and understanding the big concepts to be able to be launched at a regional level to figure out, number one, regionally, the big pieces of the puzzle that we need to have in place, figure out where our education cooperatives can help move things forward, but then more specifically be able to launch very intentional decisions and strategies, as well as tools at the district level and at each and every school level, because we know that we have to onboard our teachers. We know that we have to onboard our students, and we are doing this right now as schools are cranking up. And so, and then we have to onboard our families. And so this is work that will scale all throughout the fall. We'll continue through the work. If you've not had a chance to check out the workshop approach or workshop information and site that we've put together, we'll make sure it's really important to understand these 4 big strategies that we're after. That's access at home. That's understanding that we have to have the people in place, and then all the way through what a digital learning experience should and could look like. And so there's a lot of strategies involved in there. But from a professional learning perspective, we're moving full steam ahead. And so we also have, David, which we've mentioned on last month, we mentioned the Digital Learning Coach Stipend Match program that we are almost across the goal line to be able to send the details out on. We have the financial structure for that in place and almost solidified in order to be able to share how to actually execute on that. But our commitment is to target an amount of funding that each and every district can leverage that role. That's that real-time professional learning role. is what we're after. And so, David, that's a quick update.
Thank you. Last item we have on the agenda is to talk about the cybersecurity health check. We're required to do that once a year. Bob, I don't know if you're still on here, but I know for the Department of Education, Bob, you're to have that to me by Thursday. I know we do the same thing requirement you all do. So just a reminder that that's due by the end of August if you've not done it already. I know you've not been doing anything else this summer, I guess, but still a requirement. And I think we have a lot of good news to share with cybersecurity, even though we've had 5 or 10 times more attacks on K-12, particularly Kentucky K-12, since the beginning of COVID situation, which we've held up pretty well. I know my peer in Washington State, which I was talking to last night about the other issue I was telling you about, Internet Access Home, was spending all day yesterday with a cyber attack that impacted a good portion of their districts across the state. Bob, is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience I haven't already covered?
Sure, David. Just real quickly, I will want to remind folks that while there's no template that needs to be filled out for this report out to your board, that I did send something out via the KEs a couple of months ago when we first began reminding folks of this. If you didn't get that, or if you're brand new to the job, or if you want a reminder of that, just send me an email and I'll be happy to send something out to you that kind of goes through some of the things that you might want to consider adding to the report out to your board. And I'd be happy to do that. There have been increases, as David says, increases in the attacks for Kentucky. And they're not just like increases like 5%, 10%. These are hundreds of percent in terms of the increases of attacks that we're seeing in phishing and things like that. Some of them related to COVID-19, trying to get people to click on emails and things like that. So please be kind of educating and warning your folks not to click on things that, frankly, don't look 100% legitimate, and even then, always be a little cautious. So that's it for me. Thank you so much.
Phil with M&Ms. Phil, is there anything else you want to say? You're just showing off your M&M man. Just showing off his M&M.
Just hanging with my friend.
All right.
The M&M guy.
So for those that are watching Go Soapbox, we're through the agenda, but I want to make sure if there's anything that bubbled to the top, I'm not looking at it. Is there anything that we need to address? Obviously, we'll talk, I'll see them all, that those that are closely looking at Go Soapbox for me, not the poll questions, is there anything that bubbled to the top that I need to address before we sign off?
David, I think there's a couple, but one to point out back on the conversation about internet access at home and districts funding some. Casey Woods brought up their strategy about internet partnerships, whereas currently today he mentioned they're not paying for internet for low income homes, but they're helping develop those internet partnerships with their community. As we've always said, community-based strategies are really what we're after. So he mentioned the United Way and Cincinnati Bell, but another mention by Kelly Weiss that their local telco is working with their district on their NTI rate for homes for students without internet access, so students can access with their district provided Chromebook. So again, it's that partnership connection with the provider. And they're also working with telco to have 6 locations throughout the county for public access points for students, and being able to share that widely across all families is a great strategy. I wanted to mention that bubbled up as it connected to the topic.
We've had, and that's why we invite our CATS vendor partners to these webcasts to listen in, because they're a big part of our overall success. Obviously, the key part has been the districts and then the KD staff working together well here, but our vendor partners have well, and our agency partners have. And I really do think, without saying, is we have that going better than far any other part of the United States, which I think has contributed to our sustained success. And that's 100% perfect, but during this time is it really got to put pressure on it. And just so you know, from the Department of Education level, we are really trying to encourage our vendor partners to get to do something in all parts of Kentucky to drive costs down and to make it a low cost. If the district pays for it, it's a low cost, or the parents paying for it. I can tell you those efforts are full court press. And whatever you can do to add on to that, And so they hear your voice, and don't underestimate the voice of one person making a difference. A lot of times it just takes one. Don't ever underestimate yourself as saying, well, I'm only one person. A logical, persistent voice can make a difference. And so all these voices together, encouraging our vendor partners, encouraging some of these charity organizations to help us drive down these costs, to help pay for it, along with the other funds that we've been given. The CARES funds definitely come into play to helping out X number of districts, along with other things. But that is really top on the radar screen of a lot of us during this time. Is there anything else you see that bubbled up? Well, if not, I'll be hanging on here for 15 minutes or so, like I normally do. For those that want to hang out, we will close out the formalized part of this by saying thanks for joining us. Hope you're having a good run and go as best you can during this really unique situation for the next school year. And we look forward to being in contact with you in this month and seeing you next month. Take care.